Welcome to Convocation today. We are so glad that you are here with us. Our speaker today is Steve Weller. He is an 8th grade middle school English and art teacher and Snow College adjunct instructor. He graduated from West Jordan High School, and then he found himself here at Snow College, where he met his amazing wife, Kristen. They finished their studies here and then went on to Utah State University. And then, guess what? They came back here to Ephraim to start their family and to raise their children. Steve has completed 2 master's degrees in secondary education and educational leadership, and he recently finished an art education endorsement. As a self-proclaimed try anything and everything guy, he has painted giant murals, dabbled in portrait sculptures, and has recently jumped into the world of digital art. And this is what I find so impressive, he has drawn a comic on his classroom board every school day for the 15 years he's taught, and has published them to social media, several newspapers, and has self-published 6 books of comics, all found on Amazon. His most recent can be found down here at the table if any of you are interested in purchasing it after Convocation today and even having him sign it. I'm sure he'd be happy to do so. He teaches at 2 schools, paints, draws, and consistently creates, and yet he still finds time to be involved in his church community and being a good dad and husband. Please welcome to the Convocation stage my friend Steve Weller.
All right, here we go. I have kind of a tradition in my classroom. I start each and every class by saying, "Good morning, class," and they respond by saying, "Good morning, Mr. Weller," or "Good afternoon, Mr. Weller." So I'm going to say, "Good afternoon, Convocations," and I want you to say, "Good afternoon, Mr. Weller." Is that all right? Okay, here we go. Good afternoon, Convocations.
Good afternoon, Mr. Weller.
All right, these guys are pros. Okay. Thank you for having me here. This is fun. This is actually kind of really cool because when I was a Snow College student, I came to Convocation every single Thursday, and I was one of the students who was a card. At the time, you wrote notes on blue cards and handed your notes to the person at the door, and I collected those notes every single week for Convocations. So to be here is kind of a cool thing for me. What we're doing today is we are kicking off SNOWRIMO or NaNoWriMo. Okay, the month of November is National Novel Writing Month, and what we're trying to do is encourage people to write. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and I just want to share a few things about myself. Cheryl Berdero shared a few things, but I've been married for 18 years. I've got 5 kids. I've been teaching English language arts and art for 16 years at the middle school. I've been teaching English 1010 and English 2010 here at the college for about 14 years, and I do both. And it takes a lot of time, but I love teaching both middle school and college. And fun fact is that every single semester that I teach at the college, I have at least 1, sometimes 2 or 3 of my former 8th graders come back and take my college class, and that's really fun to see them again and to see how much they have learned and grown. Like I said, I'm a digital artist, I'm a mural painter, a cartoonist. I've self-published a few things, and then one important thing you have to know about me is that I love Captain America, and my 8th graders will attest that I'm a Captain America fan, and I have over 100 Captain America items in my collection at the school. Yeah, they're like, yeah. When it's a boring day, they've counted. All right. Like Cheryl Berdero said, I am a mural painter, and you might recognize a few of my paintings around the community. So these are some of the ones that I've done in and around the community, sometimes outside. We've got some up in Salt Lake, out in Price, some bedrooms at the schools. And that's just a fun thing for me to do. And it kind of is one of those things that not many people do, and so when you find something that you can do that nobody else does, then you kind of get a name for yourself, especially in a small town. Like they said, I dabble in portrait sculpture. I took a class, and that was really fun and extremely difficult to make sculptures, but they're kind of fun. A few years ago, when we were able to get iPads with Apple Pencils and a free Adobe Fresco program, I started drawing my comics on the iPad instead of just on pencil and paper, and that was able to transform the way that I do things. And digital art, especially on the iPad, allows you to be a little bit more expressive and creative and push the boundaries a little bit further than you would with a traditional pencil and paper or with a paintbrush, especially because there's an undo button. Okay? Raise your hand if you do any type of digital art. Okay? If you have not done digital art, try it. Okay? It does take a learning curve, but you'll find that there are so many things that you can do with it that are a lot more effective than just the old ways of doing things. Okay? All right, so what we're talking about today is SnowRimo. Okay? Can I see by a raise of hands who is going to be participating in SnowRimo? A few hands, all right. Okay, SnowRimo is kind of a subset of NaNoWriMo, which is the National Novel Writing Month, but we understand that students and professionals don't have a whole lot of time to start and finish an entire novel within 1 month. That's a little bit too much to ask, 50,000 words. And so what we're trying to do is encourage people to write and to create, okay? And the more that we can write, the more that we can create, the better that we get, okay? And so here's the big question, okay? Why am I here on this stage today? I've never written a novel, yet I'm kicking off SnowRimo and NaNoWriMo. And the reason is because I have self-published several books. Like Mrs. Berdero said, I've drawn a comic on my classroom board every single day since I started teaching at the middle school. And for several years, I have self-published just a collection from day one, getting to school until yearbook day and kids getting out for the summer, Christmas, Thanksgiving, and kids doing funny things and everything in between. Okay? A lot of the inspiration for my comics comes straight from the things that my kids do. Okay? I've got a comic coming up about a kid this year who snuck in a 2-liter bottle of soda into his backpack, and he chugged it in my class. And I was helping some other students, and I looked over, and I'm like, "You're drinking a 2-liter of soda." I've never seen that happen, okay? And then later, he ends up throwing up in another class, right? Because, okay? You can't make this stuff up, okay? And so the ability to observe the world around you and to make something of it for others to enjoy is the spark that keeps me doing this every single day. Okay? Here are just a few examples of some comics that are based on kind of some real things. This one on the left, I'm just going to let you take a minute and read some of those. This one didn't happen at my school, but it did happen in real life. I love these titters. Everyone's laughing. The 3 or 4 seconds that it takes someone to read one of my comics, to give a little and move on, that's what I live for, okay? Because at that moment, I've changed someone's day, even if it's just a little bit, for the better. Okay? I have self-published. I've never tried the traditional publishing route. But what I do is not to make a ton of money. I'm not out here to get to get famous or to make a big name for myself. Okay? Other people can do that. I do this so that as my students walk into the classroom, okay, where middle school might be the most challenging 3 years of that 13-year education, I can help. I can help put a smile on someone's face. And that's my goal. And if someone comes in and they read my comic up on the board and they smile even for that moment, I've succeeded. And that's why I do it. Okay? It's for you guys. So let's talk about the differences between self-publishing, which I've done, and traditional publishing, which I haven't done, but I have some friends who have gone the traditional publishing route, and we've talked about it. We've compared, what do I do versus what do you do, and the benefits and the downsides to both. Okay? With traditional publishing, okay, there's no cost, right? You send your manuscript in, you send your document in, and the publisher will just print it, and they will do all of the legwork of getting it out to all of the stores. They'll do all the advertising for you. It doesn't cost you a dime, okay? Whereas sometimes if you self-publish, then you have to purchase all of the books out of your own pocket money and hope that they sell, okay? And without anyone, pushing your book, then you have to make a lot of phone calls and get rejected by a lot of places, and you're like, I don't feel like I want to carry your book, okay? There's credibility on there with the traditional publishing route, okay? If you are published by Scholastic, okay, Scholastic is a well-known name, and when people see the word Scholastic on the spine of a book, they say, that's going to be a good book, okay? Scholastic wouldn't pick this book up unless it was something that's worth my time reading, okay? People who publish traditionally, they've got a lot of knowledge of the how-to, where someone who does it by themselves, they're like, well, I guess I'm going to write a book, and I guess we'll see what happens, and I guess we'll learn all about it. Okay? There are some downsides to traditional publishing, though. And the number one reason why some of my friends who have published traditionally have gone back to self-publishing is the loss of the rights to their work. If you publish traditionally, then oftentimes the publisher themselves, they will own the rights to your work and can do with it what they like, and you kind of just have to take a back seat while your work and your characters do something on their own, okay? And if you have a disagreement with them, oftentimes you are the loser on what you can and can't do with your own work, okay? There's a guy named Bill Watterson. Okay, raise your hand if you recognize the name Bill Watterson, okay? I should see way more hands than that, okay? Bill Watterson is the creator of Calvin and Hobbes, okay? Right now raise your hand if you recognize Calvin and Hobbes, okay? That's what I'm talking about. If you are not raising your hand, there is a hole in your life, in your soul that needs to be filled. Go find a Calvin and Hobbes collection and spend the next few days immersing yourself, and you'll walk away a better person, okay? If you go to a store in Disneyland, you will see Mickey Mouse plushie dolls, right? You can buy a Mickey Mouse doll. If you go to somewhere else, you can find a Snoopy plushie doll, okay? Charles Schulz, Walt Disney, they allowed their content to be created. When Calvin and Hobbes, the comic strip, was at its zenith and height of popularity, there were people clamoring, please, can we get a Hobbes stuffed animal doll? Let's get a Calvin stuffed toy so that we can have this merchandise. And Bill Watterson flat out refused. He says, I don't want my comic strip to become a novelty. Okay? That's why there are Peanuts in Disney movies, but no Calvin and Hobbes movies. Okay? And so he had a disagreement with his publisher, and ultimately, after 10 years of publishing comic strips, being one of the most famous comic strips of the 1980s and 1990s, he ended his tenure of being a cartoonist and said, I'm done. And he walked away from it. Self-publishing, on the other hand, allows you a little bit more freedom. Okay? I have this book in my hand, and every single drawing on this page and every single word is something that I have created. Okay? I have three comics per page, and each represents one school day for the past 5 years of my teaching career. So I've been teaching 15 years. This is my 16th year. So this book represents a third of my teaching career. Okay. That's a lot of drawings. Okay, this thing is massive. It's like a textbook, and like when you have to, you're like, whoa, that's heavy. But I was able to create all of that and nobody told me that I couldn't. Okay? So going the self-publishing route, I have more freedom than to put what I want out there. Okay? And at the end of the day, I have a product that I can hold in my hand and say, I did that. And there's a sense of accomplishment when you start something and you see it through until the end, and you have something that you can say, I did that. And then sometimes a couple of the people will say, hey, that looks great. And then you sell tens and tens and tens. Okay. I just want to talk to you a little bit more about where we get some inspiration. I just had to toss in a couple more comics. Okay. So these are some actual conversations that I've had with some of my students. I'm going to give you just a minute or so to read those. I think one of my favorites from several years ago was when a kid got sent to the principal's office and they handed the principal a get-out-of-jail-free card. You can't make that up, right? All right. So let me talk to you a little bit about my experience with reading as a kid. Now, I'm a language arts teacher. I teach 8th grade English. I teach English and writing here at the college. But it might surprise you that when I was younger, and I've told this to my middle school kids too, but I was the kid who didn't do their book report until it was really late, and I was the kid who was like, another book report, oh my gosh, I hate reading. Okay? It's interesting because what happened back then when I was growing up is there were not as many books targeted to the younger age as there are now. I read so many Boxcar Children books. Okay, raise your hand if you've read any of the Boxcar Children. Oh, see that? That's great. Okay. And if it wasn't a Boxcar Children book that I was reading, it was Calvin and Hobbes. Okay. Again, if you don't know it, there's a hole in your soul. Okay, go do this. Okay. But I started college here as an art major, and I wanted to grow up to be a comic book artist and draw Spider-Man comic books because that was fun for me. Okay. But one thing changed in my life, and that was when my sneaky mom, who's here in the audience, okay, she snuck a book into my stuff my freshman year of college, and it was a book that was just starting to take off and become popular, and that was Harry Potter. Okay? Now, it was a weekend where I wasn't going home, and I had nothing to do, and I looked over on my shelf, and I was like, there's nothing else to do. So I reached over myself, right? No one told me that I had to do it. And I picked up a book. Gasp, right? And I read it. It was crazy, right? Oh my gosh. I read a book without anybody telling me that I had to do it. And when I got to the end, I was like, that's really good. That was a really good book. And I got up out of my dorm room and I went to the library to see if number 2 was out. And lo and behold, it wasn't long after that I changed from being an art major to an English major. Okay? Because reading a book myself and finally figuring out the love of reading changed my life. Okay? When Harry Potter came out, it changed the world. Okay? Because so many authors had been publishing books targeted towards little kids or to adults, but there were very, very, very few young adult writers that were publishing books at that time, okay? And what happened was that when Harry Potter came out, the number of young adult books increased by a factor of 10 between 1997 and 2009, okay? This book launched, really, or made the young adult literature genre a real thing, okay? In fact, there were book release parties when the next Harry Potter book would come out that people would camp out at a bookstore just to get the next book. Okay, can you imagine? Okay, I had an experience one time where book number 6 had just come out, and my wife and I were reading it together because we were just barely married at that time. and we were going page by page, and we were reading in a park, and this one of her friend's moms walks up to it. Oh, is that the new Harry Potter book? We're like, yeah, it's great. She's like, isn't that so sad when Molly Weasley dies? And we're like, are you kidding me? You don't do that. You don't spoil. Oh, we were so mad. And then we got to the end of the book, and we're like, Molly Weasley doesn't die. So mad. Okay. All right. One of the other things that Harry Potter did was that it convinced kids that they could read longer books. Okay, because again, the young adult books at that time were less than 180 pages. You know, these boxcar children, they were these skinny books. And suddenly you come out with Harry Potter that's, beefy. And you put that beefy book in a kid's hand, it's not going to read that. They do. Okay? And they can, and they will, if it's something that captivates them. Okay? And a study showed that between 1982 and 2002, the number of young adults who read literature had dropped by 20%. But in 2009, that had rebounded, and the young adult readership had risen 21%. Okay? Now, I have been teaching 8th grade for a long time, and I know that there are so many kids out there who are like, I just don't like to read. Okay? Sometimes all it takes is finding the right book. There was an author named Brandon Mull that came to our school last month, and he gave a really great piece of advice. He said, I write the books that I want to read. Okay, and if other people like them, then that's great. Okay, we have a lot of boys in our grade who like sports, and when it comes time to do a book report, they're like, oh my gosh, another book report. Okay, and sometimes you place the right book in their hand, something by Mike Lupica, and they read it, and they're like, I see myself in those pages, and suddenly I like this book. Okay, now I want to share with you some kind of scary and interesting and surprising facts about reading. I've shared this with my 8th graders, but I want to share this with you guys because this is really important, okay? The reason that we do this, that we create and that we write, is because not a lot of people are reading as much as they should be, okay? Most people are occupied with the device in their hand. They're swiping, they're scrolling, but they're not reading, okay? Let's take a look at these. 43 million U.S. adults possess low literacy skills. 43 million. Okay? And if it's hard for adults to read, then the desire to read goes away. Why would they want to do something that's hard? Okay? People aged 15 to 44 in the U.S. spend 10 minutes or less per day reading. 10 minutes. Okay? You want to know the number of hours people spend on social media? A lot more than 10 minutes, right? Okay. Teenage reading statistics show over 80% of them don't read for pleasure on a daily basis. Okay. 27% of adults in the U.S. didn't read a book in the year 2018. Okay. If you were one of these college students who's going to be an adult soon or are going to be, jumping into the world of adulthood, don't be this statistic, okay? Do not be that statistic, okay? In terms of literacy rate, the USA ranks 125th out of 194 nations. Okay? It's lack of reading. You want to get better at something? Do it more. If you want to go to the gym and build muscles, then you start out with something small, and then you do it consistently, and you get those bigger muscles, okay? It's the same thing with reading. You start off small, and then you get better at it, okay? Some more statistics, okay? 6 additional minutes of reading per day can significantly improve kids' reading performance, okay? If you're not good at reading, do it more, okay? And again, get that right book in your hand, okay? Reading could help reduce mental decline in old age by up to 32%. Okay? If you're worried about, the mental decline in the old age, keep reading, because what reading does is it engages your brain and it engages your mind and keeps it sharp and keeps it clear. Okay, we had a lady that was in our neighborhood. She passed away about 5 or 6 years ago, but she was 102 when she passed away and still driving her car. And when you talked to her, she was as sharp as she was back when she was 25. And I was asking her one day, and she says, I just read a lot. Okay. Reading facts and statistics show that teenagers who read in their leisure time know 26% more words than those who don't. And the more words that you know, maybe the better employee you'll be. Okay? And speaking of employee, reading increases emotional intelligence and consequently your career outlooks. Okay? So, if you want to be a better overall person and a more well-rounded person, we got to read more. Okay? People have asked me, okay, how do you get noticed? So I started drawing comics on my classroom board when I first started teaching back in 2008. Social media was just, a new thing, and it hadn't really wasn't really big back then when I first started. But 10 years ago, I had some high school students who came to visit me, and they said, Mr. Weller, we love high school. We don't miss anything about middle school, which is true. But some of them missed my comics. They're like, will you put your comics out there so we can read them even though we can't come to your classroom every day? So 10 years ago, I created an Instagram account of my drawings, and it was just the drawing that I drew on my whiteboard with a whiteboard marker with terrible handwriting, and I posted, I took a snapshot of it, and I put it on Instagram for people to see. Right? And after a while, then I started drawing my comics on paper and scanning them in so it'd be a better visual quality, and someone somewhere in Brooklyn, New York, who was an editor of the Canarsie Courier, found my comics and said, hey, can we use your comic in my newspaper? And I said, yes. Okay. The same thing happened at the local newspaper here, the St. Pete Messenger. They said, hey, you do comics? Yeah, can we put your comics in our paper? I said, yes. And I get a free newspaper every week for it. Isn't that great? Okay. After posting some more, this this website called boredteachers.com, they put out funny stuff, they put out some serious stuff. They reached out to me and said, hey, we like your stuff. Can we put a collection together for teachers across the nation to see and to just get a chuckle, because a lot of these comics are very relatable if you're a student, if you're a teacher, if you're a parent, if you've ever been to middle school, if you're going to have kids that are going to be in middle school. And this post by boredteachers.com was shared many, 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 many times. But it all came by consistently putting out posts, okay? Just putting it out there, okay? Now, a lot of people fear getting rejected. Okay, raise your hand if you have something that you hold that you would like to maybe put out there someday, but you're afraid to put it out because what if nobody likes it? Okay, raise your hand if that's you. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of hands out there. The fear of rejection holds a lot of people back, okay? But if that's something that worries you, just know that you are in good company, okay? Every single person who's ever published has been rejected, okay? Now, Harry Potter changed the world, okay? It changed the face of literature as we see it today. But J.K. Rowling got rejected by 12 different publishers until an 8-year-old girl who was the daughter of an editor saw the manuscript on her dad's desk. Okay? It was just the first 3 chapters of Harry Potter #1. And the daughter picked it up, an 8-year-old little girl, and she read it, and she said, Dad, I want to read more of this story. Where's the rest of this story? Little cute little 8-year-old girl, right? And so the editor was like, all right, I guess we could publish a book about magic and magic school and kids going to magic schools. Why not? And they gave J.K. Rowling a chance, and now we know what happens, right? The rest is history. But she was rejected, okay? If you look up the biography of J.K. Rowling, she was rejected. This was the lowest point in her life where she was, scraping the bottom of the barrel just to get by financially, okay? Working multiple jobs just like so many people do. Okay? So are there other ways besides, the traditional route or the self-publishing route to get your material out there, okay? I just want to talk about something that happened back in the 1800s. There was a guy named Charles Dickens. You ever heard of Charles Dickens? Okay, one of the most famous authors in the world. He created what was called the serial novel. And every week he would publish one chapter of his book in a local newspaper. And at the time, during the 1860s, when people's biggest source of reading material was the weekly newspaper, people were waiting for that newspaper to hit so they could purchase it and read the next chapter of his book, Great Expectations. Okay? Now, we live in the 2020s, and we have so many means and opportunities to get our stuff out there. Okay? People scroll by on TikTok. If you put something out there as a serial, okay, maybe publish a couple paragraphs, or read a chapter of your book, and then the next week read a little bit more. At some point, someone is going to get hooked. Okay, someone's going to want to read the next chapter for your book. They can't wait for you to put out the next chapter. Okay, so social media and other outlets can be a great way to get your stuff out there. Okay, we're running short on time, and so I want to make sure that we get through what we need to do. So here's some advice from published authors that I've talked to that have given me some things that they wanted to share with you today. Like I shared earlier, write books that you want to read. Okay. The next piece of advice is to read. The more that you read, the more that you are bombarded with words and with language and with writing and with styles. And then you can develop and hone your own writing skill based on the things that you read. Okay? Get inspiration from the world around you. Okay? Like I said, I teach in a middle school classroom. I get so much information from my students, but I pay attention. I keep my eyes open. And when something interesting strikes, I write it down. Okay? Maybe I might use some of that later on. Maybe not. Okay? But I pay attention and I notice things. I'm an active observer. Okay? Another one said, this was from one of my favorite local authors. He said, get out there, don't give up. Keep sharing your work on social media and build your vocabulary. That was from Dustin Hanson. He's a local author. Some things from me. Put down your phone. Okay? If you want to be a better writer, get rid of some of these distractions and actually put your fingers to the keyboard. Okay? Don't be a passive consumer, but be an active creator. Okay? The next thing is to finish something. Okay? You might not like the final result in the end. You might really like it. But the sense of completion and that feeling that you get when you can finally hold something in your hand makes everything all worth it. Okay? The next thing is to push the boundaries and shock people, excite people. Do something that's never been done before. Okay? When Harry Potter was introduced, there was some magic books out there, but it wasn't like anything that anyone had ever seen before. And when you do something that's unique and original, then people start to pay attention, okay? The next piece of advice is to move from one project to the other, okay? My wife gets annoyed with this because I'm always doing something, or I'm always working on something, or I've always got another project, okay? Don't be idle, okay? Once you get idle, then you stop creating, okay? And then finally, just get something out there, okay? Something to hold in your hands that you can say, I did this, okay? Now, I have self-published books of comics, okay? And these are it's just a collection of comics that I put up on my classroom board every single day. You start on page 1 at the beginning of the year, you get to the end of the book, and it's the end of the year, okay? I'm working on, right now, 2 different kinds of books that I'm hoping to, someday get out there. The first one is a how to survive middle school. Like how do you survive middle school English? And it'll be a bunch of comics about middle school English, but it'll also be advice from teachers or advice from students. Like how do you survive English class? How do you survive being a teacher? How do you survive being a student? Or how do you survive middle school science? Okay, and get real stories and comics and illustrations to go along with that. I think that would be a really fun project, okay? The second book that I'm going to be working on is a temple history project. Now, I've delved into the realm of digital art, and I've drawn 5 temples so far, and ultimately I want to finish all of the temples that are in Utah and create a history based on each one and publish that with histories and illustrations that I've done. And so it'll be very different from anything that I've done, but it's a challenge, and it's a challenge that I'm giving myself a 3-year limit from start to finish, and I want to see that in my hands within 3 years, okay? Now, last thing. I've been talking to you a lot, but I do have one video of someone who has created a kid's book, and I'm going to share his advice with you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I give you a mail. Dear Strongbad, I was wondering if you have ever thought of a children's book, what it was about, and what kind of words did you try to teach the kids. Your fan, Steve. Never mind. I'm not even gonna touch that one. Yeah, I wrote a children's book. Who hasn't? I mean, kids can barely read as it is, so how hard can it be to write for them? The book I wrote is called Everyone is Different. So here we go. Everyone is different. No two people are the same. Some people are about to be run over. Frankie has about 5 seconds. Some people are very tall and merciless. Quincy is destroying San Antonio. Some people wears glasses. Beth looks like a dude. Some people are squirrel-handed. Gregor is a weird name. Some people have braces. Some people have headgear. Fran could play linebacker for the Raiders. Some people have rigged the enemy base with explosives. Albert has. Some people have a southern accent, and those are hot. Trisha is a severe hottie. Some people are being fangoriously devoured by a gelatinous monster. Hillary's legs are being digested. Everyone is different. No two people are not on fire. Aww. So there's my book. Pretty good, eh, Steve? And
All right, we're gonna pause there and be done. I just wanted to say thank you for letting me come today, and I'm gonna end now, but I'm gonna save some time for a few questions. If you have questions for me, then go ahead and raise your hand, and I'll take about 5 to 10 minutes of questions.
Okay, when you want to ask a question, raise your hand, and my TAs will pass the microphone to you.
How many times were you rejected?
I submitted to the comic syndicates about a dozen times to get my comics put in the newspapers, to appear on the newspaper page. I set my stuff out about a dozen times, and sometimes I heard back, sometimes I never even heard back. I came close once. They were like, oh, it was really good, but we had to go to somewhere else. So about a dozen times.
Okay. What advice would you give when self-publishing? How would you protect against plagiarism?
That is a great question, and I wish I had a better answer to it, because you can't be vigilant and just check everything all the time. But if you ever see it, you did it first. You make sure that you've got your dates squared away of when your stuff was published. And if you need to hire legal advice, then I would pursue it, because that's not okay, right? Thank you.
Have you ever had a good drawing and then accidentally deleted it?
Yes. Raise your hand if you've had a good drawing and accidentally deleted it. Oh, it's terrible, right? Okay. Luckily, most of the time you can get it back. Sometimes you can't. Okay.
What is your process for self-publishing? Like, how do you do that?
Okay. I contact Amazon Kindle Direct Publishing, and they have a guideline of how, how big the page has to be, what your margins have to be. I create the covers myself. Some people will have to hire an artist, but you have to follow their guidelines or they'll say no. There's been so many times where I've had to adjust things and delete things. This book was supposed to be on lined paper, so it'd be look like a notebook, but every time I published it, I submitted it, they said no, said no, said no. So finally, I just got so sick of it that I took out the lined pages, readjusted everything. That took, for 300 pages. It's a lot of work to readjust and scoot things and upload and wait for a few days for them to get back and say, oh, on page 6, you need to like move it down a millimeter. I'm like, are you kidding me? So, but then once it's out, then they send you a proof copy that you can view, and then you can get it out there. And you can order copies and sell tens and tens. Okay. But Kindle Direct Publishing is the one that I go through, and I'm really happy with the work when it finally comes out. So thank you for your question.
What's your favorite thing you've drawn?
Oh, that's a really good question. I draw like every day. Favorite thing that I've drawn. Mom, what's the favorite thing that I've drawn? Okay, I love these temple pictures that I'm putting out. That's one of my favorites. I really put my heart into that. But when someone, when I do like a family portrait and I capture their personality, like I'll do family portraits and caricatures, and when I get it exactly right, and they're like, we love it. I'm like, yeah, that hits the spot. Okay, thank you.
How did you find your art style when you were first making the comics?
I looked at other comics, and I drew a lot of Calvin and Hobbes comics myself. I drew superheroes, and then when I finally just started drawing one, and I kept going at it and kept going, then it kind of just evolved into the style that I have now. Each artist has their own signature style, but it takes hundreds of hours of just doing it over and over and over. Now I can just grab my stylus, do a quick little movement, and I've got the style that I want because I've done it for thousands of hours, right? Thank you. By the way, this is my mom. She's like my biggest fan and supporter. She's bought more books than anyone.
I have. Hey, tell about your bedroom.
Oh my gosh. So I drew a lot of pictures when I was a kid, and markers and Sharpies and pens and stuff. When I was 15, we moved into a new house, and it was right during the summer, and I didn't know anybody, and I couldn't go get a job and keep myself busy. So I asked my mom one day, I was like, hey, can I paint Looney Tunes and Charlie Brown characters on my wall? And she said yes. I mean, oh my gosh, that takes a lot of guts for a parent to say yes, okay? But I painted Charlie Brown and Peanuts and Looney Tunes characters on my bedroom wall, and that was the first mural that I did. And after I'd shown people pictures, they said, hey, we want you to do something on our wall. So you have to do something at least one time for it to jump out and get out there.
Tell about the characters that you did after you started meeting friends.
After what?
After you started meeting friends at West Jordan.
Some of the characters in my comic are based on real people. And so getting the personalities of them really drives the characters in my comic strips, because I can imagine someone doing that same thing and be like, oh my gosh, what would Jimmy do? Okay, my character Jimmy, who wears the glasses, he was one of my friends, and he was crazy. So if I can imagine Jimmy doing it, I can draw that down, and I keep that consistent. Yes?
How do you go through with your creative process?
My creative process starts with something that I overhear, something that I see, okay? And someone might say a funny word. I'm like, that's a really funny word. And I start getting the words down on paper. Okay, I might text a conversation to myself. I'll just grab out my phone, send myself a text, and once I get the wording right, then I'll write the words down and start putting the characters around the word bubbles. Okay, because I want to make sure that the words are clear and that the characters' actions can then go with the wording. Okay, and sometimes I'll have it done and then I'll change the words, and it's just not right. Okay, and sometimes I'll be on a deadline and be like, well, I'm going to put something out there. It's not as good as I want it to be, but I've committed to putting out a comic each school day, so here it is. So sometimes I really like the work. Sometimes I'm like, it is what it is.
So, when you were growing up, how surrounded with books were you?
We had a lot of books in the house. And some people don't have a lot of books in the house, and that's a problem, because then they don't have the opportunity to have the books on hand. Okay? My parents were really good about having books in the house, but the desire has to come from inside. It's an internal thing that once you get started and once you figure out that, you know what, I actually like that, then the spark hits. So thank you for having books at the house.
Hi, I'm in the back in the booth. I have a question.
Say.
What is your most favorite book or a book you could read over and over again and never get tired of?
Oh my gosh, I have so many. I could reread the Harry Potter series anytime. I've reread it with my older kids. We're getting our younger kids into it. Every October, I reread the Lockwood & Co. series. It's about ghost detectives, and it's kind of spooky and fun. A lot of the Rick Riordan books are fantastic. You can just pick one up, and you know what's going to happen. But I love the young adult genre, and when my students are giving their book reports, and something sounds really interesting, I'll write it down. Especially if 4 or 5 of my students give this, do their book report on the same book. People like this, so I'll go check it out, especially to make sure that they're not cheating, right? But yeah, there's a lot of great books out there that I could just reread.
Okay, we have time for one more question. I know there's somebody over here who's been waiting to ask a question.
How many books have you published?
I've self-published 6, 6 books, and all of them have been about middle school comics.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Let's please thank Mr. Weller. If